that time of year again, or is it? It's actually a little bit past that time of year, but today I'm going to be announcing the 2023 Bookoplathon, or should I say the Spookupathon. So I have known for most of this year that if the Bookoplathon was happening this year, it was not happening in September. Actually, at the time that this video goes live, if you're watching it as it goes live, I'm currently in Croatia. So don't expect any social media support for this for a couple of weeks because your girl is busy. But I did want to bring you this readathon and I could not miss the opportunity to have it in October and call it the Spookoplathon. This is something that I thought about for quite some time, but to be honest, there is an oversaturation of October readathons because all of us basic bitches love spooky season. But this year, just this once, I wanted to host my own basic bitch spooky season readathon, and so we've created the Spookoplathon. So if you guys have participated in the month-long Bookoplathon before, everything is going to be exactly the same except it takes place in October instead of September, and the board is actually themed. Everything on here that isn't a standard prompt that's on every Bookopoly board is themed somehow around spooky season. Before we get into all of that though, if you guys are unfamiliar with the Bookoplathon, if you're new here, I have a TBR game that I haven't played in a while called Becca's Bookopoly. I will link the playlist for those TBRs down below if you want to get a feel of how it works, because essentially for the Bookoplathon, I give you a printable version of an exclusive readathon board and you play Bookopoly for a month. The gist of it is very, very simple. You'll print your own board, you'll have a counter, you'll have some dice, you'll move around, you'll land on a prompt, and you will pick a book to fulfill that prompt. Now, as I said, if you are familiar with the Bookoplathon, everything is pretty much exactly the same. Aside from this round is running from the 1st to the 31st of October. This readathon does typically happen in September. Everything you need for this readathon is going to be linked in the description. There is a Twitter page. Now, I don't use Twitter very much anymore. I think, still going to be predominantly using Twitter for the readathon, but if I'm being quite honest, over the last year and a half, I've actually weaned myself off mindlessly scrolling through social media. So I want to say that the Twitter engagement will be less than it has been in previous rounds, but to be honest, the way that I run this readathon and have always run this readathon is that you will get all of the information that you need in this video, and it's very much open to interpretation. It's very much an individual game to be played by you guys, and so once you've seen this video, once you have all of your resources, there's no crucial information that I will be providing on Twitter aside from like announcements of reading sprints, which I will also announce in like my Instagram story, and if you subscribe to my channel you can get notified for those anyway. We do have a Discord. Now this is where most of the fun happens. There are people who are active in the Discord all year round. There are spaces in there where you can ask for recommendations for certain prompts if you're stuck, and other people will help you out. There's people who will provide extra information if they've got information from videos on certain things. They also like transfer sprint links and stuff across, so do join the Discord if you're looking to get involved in like the Bookopoly community. And like I said, it is active all year round, so if you just generally want bookish chat, like, it is available there as well. Now, the most important thing that you guys are going to need access to is the Google Drive that has your important resources, including your printable version of the Spookopoly board and the 5-page Spookopoly guide. This will be your best friend during this readathon. This has a breakdown of every single prompt on the board. A lot of them are open to your interpretation, and your interpretation is law, not mine, during this readathon. They will give you ideas of how like I interpreted the prompt or how I intended the prompt to be interpreted, or examples, ideas, inspiration of the kinds of books that you can pick for every single prompt on this board. I am going to be doing, I think exactly 2 weeks after this video goes live, there is going to be a recommendations video on my channel where I recommend, because there are some tricky prompts here, I recommend 3 books for every prompt on the board. So if you are struggling for inspiration, then that might help you out as well. I do want to say that while this is still very much, all of the prompts are able to be filled by a variety of genres, some of the prompts are a tiny bit more niche than they have been on previous Bookopoly boards, because the point of this round is particular is that it is a spooky season round, and I wanted the theming and the prompts to be very much in keeping with spooky season, which means that some of them are a little bit more narrow than usual, but the majority of them I would say are still very much open to fill in with a wide range of genres. So the things that you're going to need for this readathon, the most crucial one is of course the board. If you do not have access to a printer, you can pull this up digitally. You can use a virtual dice, a virtual counter, and play on on a screen. You also have the option of doing a full recreation, which I know some people do, and a lot of people also copy the board down into their Bujo. So there's no right way of doing it. It's whichever way you want to, how involved you want to get, whether you want to do a full-scale replica or just use a printable or even do it digitally. You do also need a counter, doesn't matter what it is, just to mark your place on the board. I use a magnetic bookmark. You will need 2 6-sided dice. It is kind of important that you use 2, but you can use a virtual dice roller, or if you only have 1 dice, you can roll it twice. The only reason you need 2 is because there's some specific rules, and also you move around the board quicker if you do use 2 typically. And the last thing you are going to need is your very own set of chance and community shelf cards. Now in the Google Drive there are 2 different sizes of cards that you can download. You can use the big ones, which is the size that fits my board, or you can use the small ones, which better fits the printable version, but they are pretty tiny. On the back of the chance card you are going to write a list of books. To make it more fun, if you would like to, you can write an even number of books that you really want to read during the readathon and some that you maybe don't. And it doesn't have to mean that you don't want to read them. It could mean that they're not ideal to be read in October. It could mean that it's not something you intended to read for a couple of months. Anything that's just kind of less favorable. Like I said, you don't have to play it this way. And then when you land on the chance space, you will pick one of these cards and you have to read whichever book you have written on the card. The community shelf cards are for additional prompts. So if there is anything in particular that you would like to see, if you're combining this with another readathon, you could write the prompts of the other readathon on the back of these cards, and then when you land on the community shelf space you draw a card and you have to fulfill the prompt on this card. I usually play with 16 cards because that is how many is in a full deck of Monopoly cards, which this is obviously based on, but I do appreciate obviously that this is a 1 month long readathon, so you don't have to do that many. I would say try and make them an even number, but if you want to do 4 or 6 instead, then that is perfectly reasonable. If you do not have access to a printer, something that you can do is just write them on scraps of paper, or you can make a list and use a random number generator to randomize like the one that you would pick up if you were actually drawing a card. Now there are 2 ways that you can play this game. The first way is the way that I used to play, which is making a TBR at the beginning of the month. Essentially this depends on whether you are somebody who makes TBRs ahead of time or whether you are a mood reader. But if you are going the TBR route, you can see how I do it if you watch any of the TBR videos that I've done. But I typically would roll 5 times plus doubles, which I will get into what that means in a minute, and I would build my TBR that way, and that would be what I would read in the month. If you are going the TBR route, the amount of rolls that you do is completely up to you. I always did 5 because 5 books is an achievable number for me to read it in the month, but if you only read 2 books, you might want to start with 2 rolls. You can always add on later on, or if you read 20 books in a month, feel free to do 20 rolls. The other way is better suited to you if you are a mood reader, and that is to roll as you go. This means that on the 1st of October, you will roll for your first prompt, you will fulfill it with a book. When you've read it, you will roll again and you will continue that way. Now, previously in the history of Bookopoly, I have gone the TBR route. However, I have recently, if you've noticed, swapped out monthly Bookopoly videos for occasional Bookopoly vlogs, and so for the first time ever I'm going to be rolling as I go throughout the month of October, and I am so excited. I am going to do like a general TBR of these are the books that I need to read in October, which will essentially be a lot of my pool of what books I'm going to be picking from, but during the month I am going to be rolling as I go. Next up we will go through the rules, of which there are only a handful. The first one is that everybody starts on go, which is one of the corner spaces. This is the space that you would start on when you start a game of Monopoly. And because I have had a little bit of confusion about this in the past, you do not have to fulfill the go space. That is just the space where you start from. So your first prompt will be the one that you land on after you've rolled the dice. The second rule is about doubles. The reason why you use 2 6-sided dice is because there is a punishment option if you roll a double, so the same number displayed on 2 dice faces. So when you do the TBR method, your punishment is that you have to add a roll. So if you start with 5 rolls and you roll a double, you will then end up with 6 rolls, and this can go on forever, and I've seen it go on forever. It is very entertaining, believe me. We have had some issues with mood reading and what you would do if you chose to roll as you go, which is what I'm going to be doing this year in the past. So some of the ideas that we've had for that is some people then, if they roll a double, instead of having an extra prompt, they would choose 2 books for that 1 prompt. Some people just add an extra roll, and the punishment is that because they are a mood reader, they have to pick 2 books to read instead of 1, and which obviously involves involves thinking a little bit in advance of what the next book you're going to be reading is. And my favorite one, which I will potentially be doing, I guess we'll see, is rolling twice but combining the prompts. So if you landed on lowest rated and TBR veteran, you would have to read your lowest rated book that you've also had for the longest. None of those options are correct or incorrect, whichever you feel is the best interpretation if you're somebody who's rolling as they go and like encountering the doubles roll. Like I said, this is super chill and literally nobody's going to police your decisions on anything. The last rule is that if you land on a prompt and you are so stuck, like you cannot think of a book or you just really don't want to do it, you do have the option of re-rolling for a price, and the price is that you will have to pick 2 books for the next prompt that you land on. The reason for this is that I know that a lot of people don't have book collections as large as mine, which means that their pool of possibilities for their TBR would be a lot more limited, so I wanted to offer a re-roll option, but I don't want people to abuse that, so there is a downside to that, but you can re-roll if you have to. So I'm pretty sure that that is the majority of the information that you need. Anything that I've mentioned in this video is covered in the guide, including the ways to play and the rules, so don't worry if you haven't retained all of this information. You can go ahead and look at the guide for any clarification that you may need. So now that all of that's done, we get to the part that I'm most excited about, which is a full tour of the 2023 Spookoplathon board. Welcome to your 2023 Spookoplathon board. I am very excited about this one. So as we do every year, I'm going to be doing a full tour starting off at the go space, but we're going to go through the property spaces first, then come around and do the corners and all of the special spaces on the board. So all of the properties are themed by color, so like the purples are a theme, the pinks are a theme, with the exception of the browns and the blues we have over here that are the same on every single Bookoplathon board and they mirror each other. So our very first space is lowest rated, and this is mirrored over here with the highest rated. For these two, you're going to be going to your Goodreads TBR or whatever like Bookish social media you use like Goodreads, and filtering your TBR by average rating, and you will be reading your lowest or highest rated respectively. The next space is a book that is less than 300 pages, and that one is mirrored by a big book, which is a book over 500 pages. Those ones are pretty self-explanatory. If you can't, like if you don't own any books under 300 pages, because like I don't own many, or any books over 500, then just go like as close as you can get to those page goals. The next set of properties we have are the purples, and these are spooky colors. So for these, you are just going to be reading books that have a cover that is majorly whichever color you land on. So if you land on orange, you'll be reading a book that has mainly an orange cover. For green, it will be a book that has mainly green on the cover, and for purple, it will be a book that has mainly purple on the cover. If you have a book that has these colors in the title, like there is a manga called Orange, there's also like a book called The Color Purple, you could do that as well, but I feel like the options to do it that way are very limited. Moving over here to the pinks, the theme is, I don't know what the theme of these as a group would be, but if you land on Spoopy, you are going to be reading a spoopy book. If you guys don't know what spoopy is, it is something that embodies the spirit of spooky season but doesn't have anything scary in it. So an example would be maybe like a middle grade set on Halloween, or like a cute like graphic novel about ghosts. I do have a couple of pretty cool recommendations for this that I'll be sharing in the recommendation video that's to come. For spooky, this one is probably the most open-ended prompt on this board, because obviously everything on here is spooky, so this is whatever's spooky for you. These three are the ones on the board that I would say are probably the most open to interpretation as well. So spooky could be a book with like vampires or paranormal creatures, it could be a horror, it could be like a book with a skull on the front, whatever you feel fits spooky. For stabby, we're going for, I guess, the other kind of spooky season read, and for this one I had thrillers in mind when I put this on the board, but you could also read like a grimdark fantasy, a book with an assassin as a main character, a book that has a murder, or anything you feel embodies like the stabby keyword. The oranges are quite obviously classic horror authors, and there are two ways that you can fulfill this prompt. The first ways are not the ways that I had in mind when I actually put them on the board, but that is you could read a book by any of these authors. So if you land on Stephen King, you can read a Stephen King book. The other way, and the way that I will probably fulfill these prompts if I land on them. So Stephen King, I would say, though I've never read a book by him, I feel like he is horror royalty at this point, and he has a very fitting name. So you're gonna read a book that features royalty, or is set at court, or has a royal word in the title, like king, queen, heir, throne, something like that. For Mary Shelley, we all know Mary Shelley, she's a pioneer of the horror horror genre, but also she is very often credited with being the inventor of science fiction. So for this one, you are going to read a sci-fi. Now, if you are not a sci-fi reader, I do know that there are quite a few like literary fiction and contemporary books that have a sci-fi twist. An example of this is like Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid, is a contemporary romance that has like parallel worlds. My favorite thing about Daphne du Maurier is she is the queen of an ooky, spooky, unsettling, suspenseful atmosphere. So for this, you are going to be reading a gothic novel. This can be modern gothic or it can be classic gothic, but you want something where you can cut the atmosphere with a knife. The reds are all based on omens, and first up we have the Black Cat, and you are not going to want him to cross your path. So to stop him doing that, you are going to read a book that either has a cat on the cover, a cat as a character, a cat as like the catalyst for the plot, like the Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami, something cat related. Next up we have crows and ravens, and magpies I guess would also fit into this bunch. And for this one, you are going to read a book that either has a bird, birds or feathers on the cover, or a book with a type of bird in the title, like The Butcher and the Wren by Elena Urquhart or The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen. And this one is probably the most niche of maybe all prompts on this board, if I'm being honest. Next up we have Broken Mirrors. We need to avoid 7 years bad luck because that's a hell of a long time. So for this one, you are going to read a book that either has mirror in the title, cracks on the cover, or a mirrored picture on the cover. In my recommendations video, I do have at least one example of this, but it's where like The Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare is a really good example of a new book that has a mirrored cover. The yellows are super fun as these are spooky season snacks. So the first one is Toffee Apple, or Candy Apple, I guess, if you're from the US. And the prompt for this is to read a sticky book. And that is a book that you don't think you're going to be able to put down. So it's sticky, like it keeps drawing you back in. Obviously, you won't know ahead of time whether you're gonna have that level of compulsion when you're reading. But like Colleen Hoover is an author that is like a sticky author for me. Like when I start a Colleen Hoover, I'm reading it in like 2 days because I will not be able to put it down. For Candy Corn, we want a sweet book. So this is a book that is like all vibes, no stakes, or something like a sweet contemporary romance, one where like you're not worried that anyone's gonna die, like you think it's gonna be a cute fun time and it's not going to be like end of the world things happening. And then the final one for this is Pumpkin Spice, everybody's favorite latte. So for this one, you are going to be reading a spicy book. Now you have a couple of ways you can take this. If you're a smutty gal, you can read a spicy book, or you can read something that's very exciting or like has one of your favorite tropes. Like to you, there is something spicy about the book that you're going to read for this prompt. This I think is my favorite section for the greens. All of these are inspired by the big bad villains in horror movies. We have some of your most famous fictional serial killers in here. So first up we have Jigsaw, and you know what he's going to ask you. He's going to ask if you want to play a game. So for this, you are going to read a book that features games or trials or a tournament as part of the plot. It could also be something like Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which features a video game, or you could read something like Fourth Wing that has a series of trials in, or like The Hunger Games, something that has some sort of game element in the book. For Hannibal Lecter, this is one of my favorite prompts, so you are going to try and avoid becoming his next snack. And the prompt for this is to read a book that has body parts in the title. So super common ones are like heart or blood. There's also like hand, eye, any kind of body part will save you from Hannibal Lecter. And the final one, the most beautiful illustration on this board that really tells you that fine art is my passion, is Mr. Michael Myers, and this bitch will not stop coming back. So the prompt for this is nice and easy. You are going to read a sequel in honor of the 95,000 Halloween movies that are out there in the world. Next up, we're going to go through the train stations, which actually I take back what I said about the serial killers because these are my favorites. As we all know, 2023 has been the year of Taylor Swift and the Eras Tour. So all of the train stations are inspired by spooky Taylor Swift lyrics. So the first one is from I Did Something Bad. It is They're Burning All the Witches Even If You Aren't One. For this one, you are going to read a book that features witches, witchcraft, or the occult, or any kind of like, I guess, ritualistic element. Just something in keeping with witches, you know? The next one is Are We Out of the Woods Yet? From Out of the Woods. And we all know the woods are one of the spookiest locations and one of the most popular locations for horror movies. So for this one, you are going to read a book that is set somewhere like in the forest or like isolated in the wilderness, or a book that has trees on the cover. The next train station is What a Ghostly Scene. This lyric is from My Tears Ricochet, and the prompt for this is to read a book that features ghosts or is set in a haunted mansion or features some kind of haunting. It could also be a book that has a very haunting atmosphere. And then the final train station is There Is Nothing I Do Better Than Revenge from, of course, Better Than Revenge. The prompt for this is to read a book with one of the most common like story starters in it, and that is a book that features a revenge plot. So somebody, usually when I encounter it, it is somebody that is avenging the death of a loved one or is trying to find like a missing sibling. Any kind of revenge plot like that. It could be a thriller where somebody's trying to get back at a cheating husband. Anything that encapsulates revenge, essentially. And then filling in the rest of these spaces, our first corner is of course Go. This is where everyone is starting. When you land on this, you are going to randomize your TBR, so you can use a random number generator to randomly pick the book that you're going to read. I use my entire TBR for this, but if you want to narrow it down a little bit, then you can pick like 10 books and then generate like between them. We also have the community shelf and the chance spaces, which I kind of explained at the beginning. If you land on community shelf, you will pick from your community shelf cards, which is a stack of extra prompts, and if you land on chance, you'll pull from your chance stack, which is your random jumble of book titles. We also have the TBR vet. If you land on this one, you are going to be reading one of the oldest books on your TBR, so one of the ones that you've had the longest. Our next corner is feed scroll. For this one, you are going to pick a social media of your choice, and you are going to scroll through it until you find a book that you either own or have access to. So it might be something that you know you can get on Kindle Unlimited and want to read, or something that you can access from your library if you don't like necessarily own a lot of books. I always do Goodreads for this, and I find that the best social medias for this is either Goodreads or Instagram, but you can also go on like Scribd or Audible or Amazon and use the recommendations feature to be able to do this if you wanted to. Moving on to the next side, the electric company is mood read. So essentially a free space, read whatever you are in the mood for in that moment. Our third corner is returning from last year. This was a new space that I added that I really love, and that is dice roll roulette. So for this one, you are going to roll 2 6-sided die. Every dot on the die represents 50 pages, and you are going to find a book with a page count that is as close to your roll as possible. So if you roll a 6, you will be looking for a book as close to 300 pages as possible. Now, I know that this can be complicated, so if you open up the Spookoplathon guide, there is a chart in there that tells you what page perimeter you are looking for based on your roll. So if you roll a 9, you can go to the column in that chart that says 9, and it will tell you how long that book should ideally be. If you can't get one that is within that perimeter, just get as close as you possibly can. The waterworks is poll picks. I know everybody loves this one. If you land on this one, you will put a handful of books in a poll and ask people to vote on what you should read. Our final corner is Becca Rec. In the description box, I will leave a list of all of the recommendation videos I've ever made. There is also always a link to my Goodreads in my description box as well. So you are going to find a book that ideally I have rated 4 or 5 stars. So it doesn't have to be like a favorite book ever, but it has to be a book that you know I enjoy. If you don't want to scroll through them all and you have Red Rising on your TBR, then I'm gonna say you should read that, just saying. And then the final prompt, I think, is most recent purchase, and this is quite obviously your most recent purchase. If you do not buy a lot of books, this can be the last book that you checked out from the library, the last book that you checked out from Kindle Unlimited, the last book that you borrowed from a friend, just the last book that was added to your TBR pile. Doesn't matter how, will be the book that you read for this prompt. In terms of the reading sprints, I will be doing weekly reading sprints as I have done with previous rounds. I will be mixing up the days and the times on these, so we'll have at least one set during the weekend. We'll have weekday evening ones and also weekday daytime ones probably as well. If you are a patron, there will also still be weekly Patreon sprints, so patrons will have 2 sets of sprints weekly, and I do also do a monthly 24-hour readathon with my patrons as well, which will still be happening in the month of October, and that also has 2 sets of reading sprints that go along with it. A big thank you to my patrons as well. As with last year, they are the sounding board for a lot of this. They saw the board before anyone else did. They helped me out with some ideas for the theming, like when I was looking for more serial killers and truly asking some unhinged questions. So thank you guys as always for your support. The last thing to say as well is essentially not a thing, and that is just that there will be no merch for this round. I truly, like, I would have loved to have reworked all of the Bookoplathon stuff I did last year into a spooky season version, but I truly just do not have the time to turn that around, so unfortunately there won't be any merch at all this year. But it's fine, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna download our boards and we're gonna read a hecking ton of books, and that's all we're gonna worry about, okay? That is the plan, that's what we're doing, and we're gonna have a great time doing it because it's spooky season. Oh, there will be, last thing, there will be a Google form as well for everybody to track the pages. The link to that will be in the description box, but it is not going to be in the description box yet. I will add that on the 1st of October. That is because people get a little bit overexcited and start filling it in for no reason ahead of the readathon starting, and then I have to go ahead on the last day of September and delete everything that people have randomly entered. So to stop that, you will get access to a link on the 1st of October, and everything will also be included in a pinned thread on Twitter. Like I said, at the time this video goes live, I am going to be away, so all of that pinned information and the like reworking of all of the Discord is not going to happen until I get back, but rest assured it will happen before the start of the readathon. So that is pretty much everything. Thank you very much for once again supporting the Bookoplathon for another year. I know that this probably, with it being spooky themed, won't be suited to everyone, but honey, I hate to break it to you, not everything in this world is. But yeah, I hope that you guys are as excited about this as I am. If you are, please let me know down in the comments, and aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you like it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find everything you need for the Bookoplathon, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. And also, because I've done this all in the wrong order, a link to my Instagram, Goodreads, and Twitter that I don't use, if you'd like to follow me on any of those. But aside from that, guys, may the rolls be ever in your favor. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.